Everyone thought he was just a weak old-school janitor, until the bikers pushed him too far. "You're done here, old man. Back off. You have no idea." He cleaned their school for 23 years in silence, until they found out he was a Navy SEAL.
The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty school parking lot of Lincoln High, where Mr. Thompson pushed his heavy cleaning cart with the same steady rhythm he had maintained for 23 years, his silver hair catching the light, and his slight limp barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't really looking, while the distant sound of revving motorcycle engines grew louder, cutting through the quiet. Like a warning, he didn't flinch even as the iron serpents rolled in their matte black bikes gleaming under the fading sunlight. Their leader, Diesel, a cocky 24-year-old with a patched vest, an arrogant sneer, parking his Harley directly in front of Mr. Thompson's path, forcing the old janitor to stop, his weathered hands tightening slightly on the cart handle, but his face remaining calm and unreadable as the gang laughed and started their usual game of small cruelties, kicking over a nearby trash bin so garbage spilled across the freshly swept asphalt, while Diesel leaned forward on his bike and called out, "Hey, old man, you gonna clean that up? Or just stand there looking pathetic?" And Mr. Thompson simply nodded, once lowered his head, and began sweeping the mess without a word. His movements precise and practiced the same way he had cleaned blood and dirt from far worse places in his past. A past none of these boys could even imagine, as Coach Peterson watched from the gymnasium doors, his jaw tight, knowing something was building something dangerous, because these young, reckless bikers had no idea they were tormenting a man who once carried dying soldiers on his back through enemy fire, who had stitches from shrapnel that still ached when it rained, and who carried medals in a dusty box at home that told stories of courage most men only see in movies. Yet here he was, quietly cleaning their mess day after day, absorbing their taunts and their disrespect with a silence that wasn't weakness, but something far more disciplined, something forged in war and tempered by time. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in deep oranges and reds, the tension in the air thickened, because Mr. Thompson's patience, though vast, was not infinite. And the iron serpents, mistaking his calm for fear, kept pushing harder, laughing louder, and getting closer to the moment when the quiet keeper of Lincoln High would finally reveal the warrior he had buried beneath the janitor's uniform, the parking lot slowly emptying as students went home, leaving only the sound of engines and mocking laughter, while Mr. Thompson continued sweeping, his eyes steady and his hands sure, knowing that every small cruelty they delivered was being carefully measured and remembered, because some men choose peace after war, but peace does not always choose them back. And in that golden hour light, with the smell of exhaust and spilled trash hanging heavy in the air, the first real cracks in the gang's confidence began to show when Mr. Thompson looked up for just a moment, his gaze meeting Diesel's with such quiet intensity that the young leader felt something cold run down his spine, though he quickly laughed it off and revved his engine louder, pretending he wasn't bothered, but deep down, something had shifted. The old janitor wasn't as harmless as he seemed, and the slow burning tension that had been building for weeks was now approaching its inevitable breaking point as the motorcycles circled him like predators testing an animal they wrongly assumed was weak, the weight of unspoken history pressing down on the scene, making the air feel thicker, and every laugh from the iron serpents ringing more hollow than the last, because Mr. Thompson kept cleaning, kept nodding, kept choosing silence, and that silence was becoming louder than any shout they could muster, the kind of silence that comes before a storm, the kind that hides storms within it. And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the school building, leaving the parking lot in deepening shadows, the stage was quietly set for the day when these reckless young men would discover just how dangerous a quiet man with a hidden past could truly be. The cartwheels squeaking softly as Mr. Thompson moved to the next mess, his face calm, his heart steady, and his secrets still locked away for now, waiting patiently for the moment they would finally be forced into the light. The harassment that began as scattered pranks slowly transformed into something darker and more calculated as the weeks dragged on, turning the once peaceful hallways of Lincoln High into a daily battlefield where Mr. Thompson moved like a ghost through his own domain, pushing that same heavy cart with quiet determination, while the iron serpents grew bolder with every passing day, their laughter echoing off the freshly polished lockers as they waited for him after final bell revving their engines right outside the main doors. So the thunderous roar vibrated through the entire building, making students flinch and teachers shake their heads in disapproval. Yet no one dared intervene directly because Diesel and his crew carried themselves with the reckless confidence of youth that had never been truly challenged. Diesel especially seemed to take personal pleasure in the public humiliations, cornering Mr. Thompson near the trophy cases, flicking cigarette ashes onto the floor he had just mopped and sneering, "Hey Grandpa, you missed a spot," while his friends formed a loose circle blocking the old janitor's path, forcing him to navigate around their bikes and their bodies with the same patient silence that had become his armor against their cruelty. The other students whispered and recorded on their phones, turning the quiet keeper into unwilling internet entertainment. But Mr. Thompson never raised his voice, never complained to the principal, never showed the anger that simmered deep beneath his calm exterior. He simply bent down, collected the scattered trash, wiped the ash marks, and continued his work with hands that remained steady even when Diesel shoved his cart hard enough to send bottles rolling across the hallway one Thursday afternoon in front of a crowd of watching students. The young biker stepped too close, breathing cigarette smoke into Mr. Thompson's face, and demanded, "You gonna do something about it, old man, or you just gonna keep cleaning up after real men?" And in that moment, Coach Peterson pushed through the gathering crowd, his face flushed with protective anger. "That's enough, Diesel, leave him alone. He's done nothing to you." But the gang leader only laughed louder and replied, "Relax, coach, we're just having fun with the help." While Mr. Thompson met the coach's eyes for a brief second, giving him a small, almost imperceptible nod that said everything was under control. Even though inside the old janitor felt the slow burning pressure building like a kettle left too long on the fire, because these boys had no idea they were tormenting a man who had once worked through mortar fire to save lives, who had held dying brothers in his arms, whispering final words of comfort while bullets whipped past his head, and who carried scars both visible and invisible from battles that would break most men. Yet here he was, choosing peace every single day, choosing to clean their messes and absorb their disrespect with a dignity that only made them angrier, because his refusal to react felt like defiance to them. The escalation continued day after day, with new cruelties invented on the spot, blocking his access to the supply closet during lunch, revving engines so loudly during his afternoon rounds that he couldn't hear himself think, and once even slashing one of his trash bags so garbage spilled across the entire main hallway, right before a parent-teacher meeting, forcing Mr. Thompson to clean it all, while dressed-up parents stared and whispered, but through it all, he remained the same quiet keeper, nodding politely when addressed, sweeping, mopping, polishing, and raising that American flag every morning with the same reverence he had shown for decades. Coach Peterson tried speaking to the principal, but the response was weak, and bureaucratic hands were tied, without physical proof of violence, and so the torment continued growing heavier with each passing week, the tension in the school thickening like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, because everyone could feel something coming, something inevitable, and when it finally broke, it would change everything. The gang mistook Mr. Thompson's silence for fear, when in reality, it was discipline, the kind of iron discipline that only comes from years of training under fire, the kind that allows a man to stay calm while chaos explodes around him. And as the final bell rang on that fateful Friday afternoon, with dark clouds gathering overhead and the parking lot waiting like an arena, the iron serpents gathered with a new dangerous energy in their eyes, because today they had decided the fun would go further. Today they would make the old janitor react. Today they would break him, or so they believed, completely unaware that the quiet keeper they had spent months tormenting carried within him the soul of a warrior who had faced far worse than a group of arrogant boys on motorcycles. The air grew heavy with anticipation. The engines roared louder than ever, and Mr. Thompson walked toward his old pickup truck, carrying the last bags of trash, his limp more noticeable now, after a long week of constant pressure. Yet his shoulders remained straight, his gaze steady, and his secrets still locked away deep inside, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be enough, and the truth had buried for so long would finally step into the light, changing everything. In one devastating instant of revelation, the parking lot felt smaller somehow, the shadows longer, and the weight of unspoken history pressed down on every soul present because the escalation had reached its peak and the breaking point was now only moments away. The parking lot of Lincoln High lay under a heavy gray sky that Friday afternoon, as dark clouds gathered like silent witnesses to the storm that had been building for months. Mr. Thompson walked steadily toward his old pickup truck, carrying the final bags of trash from the day, his silver hair catching the cold wind and his slight limp more pronounced after weeks of constant pressure. While the iron serpents waited for him like a pack of wolves sensing weakness, Diesel sitting on his matte black Harley with a cruel smirk. As his 8 crew members formed a loose circle blocking the old janitor's path, their engines idling loudly, filling the air with the smell of exhaust and aggression. The tension was thick enough to taste as Mr. Thompson stopped a few feet from his truck and looked at them calmly, without fear, without anger, just that same quiet dignity that had infuriated them for so long. Diesel stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "You think you're tough, old man, staying silent like some kind of saint, while we mess with you every day. Well, today's the day we see what you're really made of." And before Mr. Thompson could respond, 2 of the bigger bikers moved behind him and shoved him hard against the side of his truck, the impact rattling the old vehicle and sending one trash bag spilling across the asphalt. The gang laughed loudly as Diesel got right in his face, breathing heavily. "You gonna fight back, Grandpa, or you just gonna keep taking it like a little bitch?" And another shove came harder this time, knocking Mr. Thompson's cap off his head, revealing the military short haircut beneath the old janitor. Stumbled, but caught himself, his weathered hands steadying on the truck bed, his eyes changing in that moment from patient calm to something colder, something forged in fire and discipline. The gang didn't notice at first, still laughing and taunting, calling him weak, pathetic, useless. But Mr. Thompson straightened slowly, his voice cutting through their noise like a blade, low-controlled and carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You boys have no idea what kind of mistake you're making right now." The laughter faltered slightly as Diesel sneered. "Oh yeah, what are you going to do, call the principal on us?" And he shoved Mr. Thompson again, this time harder, making the older man hit the truck with a dull thud. But instead of falling or begging, Mr. Thompson looked Diesel directly in the eyes and spoke words that froze the entire group. "I spent 24 years as a Navy SEAL medic. I dragged men twice your size through hell while bullets tore the air around us. I held soldiers while they died in my arms, whispering their last words to their mothers. I earned 3 Purple Hearts and a Navy Cross for actions you couldn't even comprehend in your worst nightmares. And I chose this life after retirement. I chose to clean floors and raise that flag every morning because I earned my peace." The parking lot fell into complete dead silence. The only sound was the wind and the low idle of the motorcycles. Diesel's face went pale, his cocky smirk completely gone as the reality of who he had been tormenting for months crashed down on him. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, looking at each other with sudden fear, because the quiet old janitor they had laughed at, shoved, and humiliated was staring back at them with the eyes of a man who had seen real war, who had faced death countless times and chosen not to bring it back with him. Coach Peterson stood frozen near the gymnasium doors, having rushed out after hearing the commotion, his face filled with quiet pride as Mr. Thompson continued, his voice never rising, but carrying terrifying weight. "I didn't want any of you to know this. I wanted to live my quiet life, cleaning up after children who don't understand sacrifice, but you pushed and pushed and pushed until, I have to tell you the truth, I could have ended every single one of you without breaking a sweat. But I chose not to, because I am no longer that man." The gang stood completely still. The arrogance drained from their faces as they realized the enormous mistake they had made. Diesel took an involuntary step backward, his hands trembling slightly as the weight of his actions finally hit him. The old man they had tormented wasn't weak, he was disciplined. He wasn't scared, he was in control. And the breaking point they had tried so hard to reach had arrived, not with violence, but with a quiet revelation more powerful than any punch could ever be. The dark clouds above seemed to press lower, as if the sky itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The parking lot felt smaller, the air heavier, and every single member of the Iron Serpents understood in that frozen moment that they had not been bullying an old janitor. They had been provoking a warrior who had simply chosen peace until they made peace impossible. And as the first drops of rain began to fall on that cold Friday afternoon, the true nature of Mr. Thompson. The quiet keeper of Lincoln High was finally stepping out of the shadows, changing everything in one devastating heartbeat of truth. The gang that had come to break him now stood broken themselves, facing the reality of the man they had so foolishly underestimated. The rain began to fall in slow, heavy drops across the Lincoln High parking lot as the iron serpents stood frozen in complete silence, their usual arrogance shattered in pieces by the quiet revelation that had just cut through the air like a blade. Mr. Thompson stood tall, despite his age, and limp, his silver hair now damp from the rain, his eyes steady and unflinching as he looked at each young face in front of him, the weight of his words still hanging between them like smoke after an explosion. Diesel, who had spent months tormenting the old janitor, now looked small and pale, his hands trembling slightly at his sides as the reality crashed down upon him that the quiet man they had laughed at, shoved and humiliated, was not just some weak old cleaner, but a retired Navy SEAL medic who had walked through hell and carried dying brothers on his back while the world tried to kill him. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, their engines still idling, but the sound now felt hollow and pathetic against the heavy rain and the thunderous silence that followed. Mr. Thompson's confession coach Peterson stood a few yards away, watching with quiet pride and deep respect as the old janitor continued speaking, his voice low, controlled, and carrying decades of hard-earned authority. "I didn't want any of you to know this. I chose this quiet life after retirement because I had seen enough blood and death. For 10 lifetimes, I chose to clean these hallways and raise that flag every morning because, after everything I went through, I earned my peace. But you boys kept pushing, kept laughing, kept thinking that silence meant weakness. And now here we are, in this parking lot, with the truth finally spoken." The gang remained completely still. No one dared move. No one dared speak as the rain grew heavier, soaking their leather vests and running down their faces. Diesel opened his mouth, but no words came out. The cocky leader who had felt invincible just minutes ago now looked like a child who had accidentally awakened something far greater than himself. Mr. Thompson took one slow step forward, his limp noticeable, but his presence commanding. "You wanted a reaction. You wanted to break me, but all you did was force me to remember who I really am. I have buried men younger than you on battlefields you couldn't even imagine. I have held pressure on wounds while enemy fire rained down around us, and I have chosen every single day since then to live with dignity instead of violence. So no, I will not fight you. I will not raise my hands against any of you, but I want you to remember this moment for the rest of your lives. The moment you discovered that the quiet janitor you loved tormenting was more of a man than all of you combined." The rain fell harder, now mixing with the tears of shame beginning to form in some of the younger bikers' eyes, as the full weight of their actions settled upon them like lead. Diesel finally stepped back, his voice barely audible above the rain. "I'm sorry, man. We didn't know. We thought you were just—" Mr. Thompson raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I don't need your apology. I need you to become better men than what you showed me these past months. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn by how you treat those you think are beneath you. Go home. Think about what kind of men you want to be, because the world is full of people who will judge you by the worst thing you've ever done. And today you almost became that for me." Coach Peterson finally walked forward, placing a supportive hand on Mr. Thompson's shoulder as the gang slowly backed away, their heads lowered, their bikes no longer sounding powerful. But defeated one by one, they mounted their Harleys and rode away into the rain without another word, without another laugh, without the arrogance that had defined them for so long. The parking lot grew quiet, except for the sound of falling rain and distant thunder, as Mr. Thompson stood there for a long moment, letting the water wash over him, before bending down to pick up the scattered trash with the same steady hands that had once saved lives on battlefields far away. Coach Peterson helped him silently, the two men working together under the rain until everything was clean. Once more word of what happened spread through the town like wildfire by Monday morning students, who once ignored Mr. Thompson now greeted him with genuine respect. Teachers brought him coffee and asked about his day. The principal made a special announcement praising his decades of quiet, dedicated service. And even some of the Iron Serpents were later seen quietly helping clean up around the school without being asked. Diesel himself was spotted one evening alone picking up trash in the parking lot, his usual crew nowhere in sight. The lesson had been learned the hard way: never judge a man by the mop in his hands or the uniform he wears, because some of the most dangerous and honorable men in the world choose to live quietly after their wars are over. Mr. Thompson returned to his routine as if nothing had changed. He still pushed his cart down the same hallways, he still polished the same trophy cases until they gleamed, and he still made sure that American flag in the lobby hung perfectly straight every single morning. But now, when he walked past students, they smiled. When teachers passed him, they nodded with deep respect. And when Coach Peterson saw him in the hallway, he always stopped for a proper conversation, because the quiet keeper of Lincoln High had finally been seen for who he truly was, not just a janitor, but a silent guardian, a warrior, who had chosen peace and a man whose dignity could never be broken by small cruelties. The rain eventually stopped, leaving the parking lot clean and shining under the returning sun, and as Mr. Thompson raised the flag the next morning, watching it wave gently in the breeze, he allowed himself the smallest of smiles, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories are not won with fists or weapons, but with quiet strength, patience, and the courage to remain decent even when the world tries to break you. The Iron Serpents never bothered him again, and the town of Lincoln learned a valuable lesson: that true power often hides in the most unassuming places, wearing the humble uniform of a man who simply chooses every day to clean up the messes of others without asking for thanks or recognition, because the quiet keeper had taught them all that real strength doesn't need to shout, it simply endures, stands tall, and continues doing what is right long after others have given up. The sun rose higher, casting golden light across the school, and Mr. Thompson went back to work, pushing his cart with the same steady rhythm, his secrets now known, but his dignity still perfectly intact, a living reminder that some heroes don't wear capes. They wear janitor uniforms and carry their battles silently in their hearts forever.